Good morning, everyone. The weather is changing, and I can sense a different kind of spirit among us because we've got warmer weather coming, and we've all been hoping for that. So it's great to be with you today. Welcome to First Unitarian Church of Cincinnati. I'm Tim Krause, and I'm going to be your worship associate today. And as we usually say, First Church is a place where you're free to be you. No matter your race, your sexual orientation, your gender identity, socioeconomic status, or your age. And I'm glad for that. So bring your questioning mind, your expansive heart, and your entire self to this beloved community. Our mission at First Church is to welcome all with love, to support learning, spiritual growth, and to serve our wider community, and to work for justice, equity, and inclusion. And that's why we periodically remind ourselves that we live in worship on stolen land. Land that was stolen from the ancient mound builders, the Shawnee people, and the Miamia people. And if you would want to know more about that, in our lending library, we have this book, The Indigenous Peoples' History of the United States. There are several copies, and you can borrow this book to read it because it's a great enlightenment about what actually happened to the indigenous people of our nation. If you're visiting with us today, we especially welcome you. I got to meet two new people. Bear, it's so wonderful to have you here. And I think, I can't remember who was with you, Bear, but so glad to have you here. Please feel free to join us for coffee hour following the service, which will take place in the Ellen Hall Room. And if you don't know where the Ellen Hall Room, the ushers can direct you there. It's our fellowship hall off to my right, your left. We would love to have a chance to get to know you, and you know, we always need to practice our social skills, because that's how you make people feel welcome, by practicing your social skills. Our flowers today are given by Doug Gerard, who says, "These flowers are given in memory of my father, Gordon Gerard, who died much too young, 45 years ago this month." Our thoughts are with you, Doug. Thank you for the flowers. Now, as a reminder, it's important to take a few minutes to read announcements and inserts in the order of service. And I want to particularly draw your attention to the adult faith development offerings. And we really do need people to sign up in advance so that we know who is coming, and it helps us do our planning better. So please take a careful look at that. And there's also some information about the Sunday School Travel Journal on the other side of that. So when I'm ready to have the chalice lit, Barbara, can you come up? I'll call you up at that point. But I was challenged by Alex today, and this is going to be part of our, actually, you know what? I forgot, we got to greet our neighbors, and we got to say hi to those people watching in. We'll do that, and then I'll come back to this. So let's take a moment to say hi to each other and to hi to everybody that is watching on YouTube. I will ring this singing bowl to bring us back. Well, you may not necessarily know this from the title of the sermon today, but Alex is going to be preaching about Friedrich Nietzsche and his philosophy and thoughts on religion. So as a challenge, he asked me to see if I could find any connection between my religious hero, Moncure Conway, and for those of you who don't know who Moncure Conway is, he was a minister of our church in the 19th century before the Civil War. And he became a world-renowned philosopher and public intellectual. So I was challenged, and I did a little quick research, and I did discover that even though Nietzsche and Conway did not meet, Conway wrote about Nietzsche. And in Conway's 2-volume biography of Thomas Paine, the American revolutionary, he noted the similarities between Thomas Paine's philosophy about politics and religion and Nietzsche. And he drew inspiration from Nietzsche's writings. So I found that wherever I go, I can always find a connection to Moncure Conway. And it's kind of a wonderful thing for me. It's one of the refuges that I can often go to. So what I would like to do right now for our chalice lighting, if you could come up, Barbara, is that we're going to light our chalice this morning with the words of Moncure Conway as he addressed the World Conference of Freethinkers in 1904. This was in Rome, and it comes from a lecture that he called Dogma and Science. And I'm very confident that Friedrich Nietzsche would have been cheering him on had he been alive to hear these words. And so Conway said, "So long as men accept religious control not based on reason, they will accept political control not based on reason. The man who gives up the whole of his moral nature to an unquestioned authority suffers a paralysis of his mind, and all the changes of outward circumstances of the world cannot make him a free man." They're actually words that are quite relevant for today. So, Meredith's going to introduce our very first hymn.
So as Tim mentioned, there is a travel itinerary in your order of service, which will tell you what our children have been learning and will be learning in the next month. So this month they've been learning about Buddhism, and last week during our children's chapel, they learned a Buddhist song filled with loving kindness. And as we learned this song, we also did some hand motions with it. So I'm going to invite you to rise as you are willing and able and join in singing hymn number 1031. And if you want, you can follow along with me as we do the hand motions. I'm going to invite my friends here to join me as I read a story. Let me grab it. So I don't know if you heard Tim talking, but today the adults are going to talk about Fredrich Nietzsche, who is a philosopher. Does anyone know what a philosopher is? You don't know? It's someone who asks a lot of questions. And so I have a book here, Why, by Lindsay Camp and Tony Ross. All right? It's a book about questions. Let's see what happens. There was one thing Lily did that drove her dad mad. Actually, it wasn't a thing she did, it was a thing she said. Why? She said it all the time. She said it first thing in the morning. It's time you were dressed. Why? She said it at breakfast time. Your egg just needs another minute. Why? She said it when they went shopping. Mustn't forget to buy more bin bags. Why? She said it when her dad read her a story. Once upon a time, there was a friendly crocodile. Why? And of course, she said it at bedtime. It's time for bed, Lily. What'd she say? Why? Usually, Lily's dad did his best to explain. Don't sit down there, Lily. Why? Because you'll get your trousers wet. Why? Because the grass is soaking wet. Why? Because it rained all last night. Why? Because there were lots of big black clouds full of tiny drops of water. Why? Because, well, there just were, Lily. There just were. But sometimes, when he was a bit tired or too busy, he'd just get cross. Do you know what cross means?
No.
It means upset. It's another word for upset. I wish you wouldn't always say why, Lily. Why? Because it drives me mad.
Why?
It just does, Lily. It just does. Then, one Friday, something rather unusual happened. Lily was playing in the sandpit in the park. Just a few minutes more, Lily. Why? Because it's nearly lunchtime. Why? Suddenly, Lily's dad stopped and looked upwards. So did Lily, and so did everybody else in the park. Because, oh, good heavens, he says. Lily was too astonished to say anything. After all, she'd never seen a gigantic Thargon spaceship before. You haven't seen a gigantic Thargon spaceship either?
No.
Oh.
You don't even know what they are.
Ah,
I have.
good grief. You have?
I did.
Oh,
Because I'm a superhero and I go adventuring all night.
oh, well, that's amazing. The Thargon spaceship came lower, and then it landed in the park, right next to the sandpit. Everybody stood and stared. The doors of the spaceship slid open, and out squelched several Thargons. They didn't look very friendly. The most important Thargon oozed forward. "Tremble, Earthlings! We have come to destroy your planet." Everyone started to tremble. Can you tremble? Tremble. Yeah. Everyone, except Lily, that is. What did Lily say?
Why?
Why? Because that is our mission, of course. Why? Because destroying puny planets brings glory to the mighty Thargon Empire. Because our great leader, the Imperial Tharg, says so. Because he just does, small female earthling. He just does. The chief Thargon turned to his friends. He looked thoughtful. Lily and her dad and all the other people watched as they talked together in Thargish for quite a long time. Then the chief Thargon slithered forward again and spoke to Lily. Your questions show disrespect to our great leader. However, we realize destroying planets hasn't done us much good. It just makes everybody hate us. We're going home to Tharg to think it over. Lily was just about to say something, but her dad put his hand over her mouth. Bye. Have a nice day. Sorry to have troubled you. That night at bedtime, when he'd finished reading her a story, Lily's dad gave her an extra big hug, and then he promised he'd never get cross with her again, no matter how often she asked him why. I was very proud of you in the park today. Why? I just was, Lily. I just was. Why? So that's the end of our story, and I hope it shows you that you should never stop asking questions. Why? Maybe that's one you'll have to answer yourself. Okay, friends, let's head on to our class.
Well, good morning, everybody. Is it the warm temperatures or Friedrich Nietzsche that brings you to First Church this morning? Or others? So great to see so many of you here. After church today, we have our second New You class happening upstairs in the senior high room / room 207. And I'm leading that, so despite today's topic, which I would love to talk to you all about for hours, I will not be able to do a receiving line, so unfortunately. So, Friedrich Nietzsche may be an odd topic to hear in a church on Sunday morning, because after all, Friedrich Nietzsche is the German philosopher who pronounced the death of God in the mouths of a madman, which is going to be the reading this morning. And it's about a 5-minute reading, but if you have never heard the madman proclaim the death of God, you need to hear this before you die. So this morning you can check this off your bucket list. And it will be our leaping off place for the remainder of the sermon. Have you not heard of that madman who lit a lantern in the bright morning hours, ran into the marketplace, and cried incessantly, "I seek God! I seek God!" As many of those who did not believe in God were standing around just then, he provoked much laughter. "Has he got lost?" asked one. "Did he lose his way like a child?" asked another. "Perhaps he's hiding. Maybe he's afraid of us. Has he gone on a voyage? Emigrated?" Thus they yelled and laughed. The madman jumped into their midst and pierced them with his eyes. "Whither is God?" he cried. "I will tell you, we have killed him, you and I. All of us are his murderers. But how did we do this? How could we drink up the sea? Who gave us the sponge to wipe away the entire horizon? What were we doing when we unchained the earth from its sun? And whither are we moving now? Backward, sideward, in all directions, are we not continually plunging through empty space? Is there still any up or down? Has it not become colder? Is not night continually closing in on us? Do we not need to light lanterns now in the morning? Do we hear nothing as yet of the noise of the grave diggers who are burying God? Do we smell nothing as yet of the divine decomposition? Gods, too, decompose. God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? What was holiest and mightiest of all the world has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe this blood off of us? What water is there for us to clean ourselves? What festivals of atonement, what sacred games shall we have to invent to exonerate ourselves? Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we ourselves not become gods simply to appear worthy of this deed? There has never been a greater deed, and whoever is born after us, for the sake of this deed, will belong to a higher history than all history hitherto. And here the madman fell silent and looked again at his listeners. And they too were silent, and they stared at him in astonishment. At last he threw his lantern on the ground and broke it into pieces, and it went out. "I have come too early," he said. "My time is not yet. This tremendous event is still on its way, still wandering. It has not yet reached the ears of human beings. Lightning and thunder require time. The light of the stars requires time. Deeds, though done, still require time to be seen and heard. This deed is still more distant from them than the most distant stars, and yet they have done it themselves." It has been further related that on the same day, the madman forced his way into several churches and there struck up his Requiem Aeternam Deo. Let out and called to account, he is said always to have replied nothing but this: "What, after all, are these churches now, if they are not the tombs and sepulchres of God?" When I was an intern at the Unitarian Universalist Church in Ann Arbor, Michigan, in 1990/91, during a Sunday morning, a young man walked in all dressed in black, very agitated. And before long, his agitation became enough that the ushers had to remove him from the sanctuary, and they took him to a room and called in a counselor a few minutes later to speak with this young man. And it turned out that the young man was professing to be suicidal. And he was invoking the meaninglessness of life. He had what he understood to be a nihilistic streak about him that drew him to conclude that life wasn't worth living. And he invoked the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, well known in the popular mindset as a nihilist, anti-religious thinker. And indeed, that is the common understanding of Nietzsche in the popular mindset. Now, after the service, I didn't get to speak to this young man. He was taken away, not through an ambulance, but through the ushers, and he left the church. And they followed up with him a few days later to make sure he was okay, but they told me what happened. Now, I had studied philosophy at the University of Michigan, and I absolutely loved my experience at the University of Michigan. So much so that when people find out I went to Harvard Divinity School, they're often very impressed because it's Harvard, and I've got a sheepskin on my wall that proves it. But I always hastily tell them, but that's not where I learned to think. I learned to think in the philosophy department at the University of Michigan. However, in all of my time at the University of Michigan, I never had a professor introduce me to Friedrich Nietzsche. So I also shared the popular mindset that Nietzsche was a nihilistic thinker who thought that life was meaningless. And when I found out what this young man was saying to the ushers and the psychologist who spoke to him, I thought to myself, how in the world did I get out of the University of Michigan with a degree in philosophy and never had Nietzsche introduced to me? So I delved into Nietzsche myself because I wanted to get a sense where this young man was coming from in case he returned so that I could speak with him and minister to him. Well, Nietzsche's pretty sticky. Reading Nietzsche's philosophy is like getting caught in a spider's web. If you have any philosophical predisposition at all, once you begin to read Nietzsche, you're going to get sucked in. And I did. And I read him, and I read him, and I read him, and I read him. And I concluded before long, this is a few months of spending too much of my internship time delving into Nietzsche, that the Nietzsche that was presented to us by this young man and the Nietzsche that exists in the popular mindset is incredibly erroneous given what I was reading in Nietzsche's philosophy. And I actually began to come to the conclusion that, quite contrary to being a nihilistic thinker, Nietzsche was one of the most affirmative religious thinkers I knew. And so, fast forward a number of years, I go to divinity school, and I get my degree in divinity, but I'm a young single man doing ministry 20 miles south of Cambridge, and I was rather bored, so I decided I'm going to go back and get another degree just for the fun of it. And so I did, and I wrote a small paper to get my Master's of Theological Studies from Harvard on Friedrich Nietzsche. But I wasn't happy with it. And fast forward a number of more years, when my son was born, we needed somebody to stay home with him, and my wife was in a position at a church in Wayland, Massachusetts that she really loved and was paying her better than me. So I said, I'll stay home with Preston, and in the meantime, I'm going to go get another degree. Because I've decided somebody needs to write a book on Friedrich Nietzsche to correct the record. And if I'm going to do that, I might as well get a doctorate for it. And so I applied to Andover Newton Theological School because Harvard doesn't give doctorates of ministry, oddly, I found. Lost income stream there, methinks. But for whatever reason, they didn't. So I went to a nearby school, and I went to them and I said, I want to be admitted to your doctorate of ministry program, and I want to write a dissertation on Friedrich Nietzsche. And they said, pray tell, what in the world would you bring to a divinity school to talk about the philosopher who said God is dead? And I told them, I want to write a dissertation proving that Nietzsche was one of the most affirmative religious thinkers there was. And they scoffed at me. And I said, well, here's the way I see it. It's my time, it's my dime, it's my risk. I'll write it, and if you don't accept it, I won't get my degree. And they thought, good reasoning, we'll let you in, we'll see how it goes. So I ended up writing a 300 and some page dissertation on Friedrich Nietzsche, which I must say, for those of you in YouTube land even, it's one of the best works on Friedrich Nietzsche I've encountered. Pat myself on the back, and my readers of my dissertation thought it was one of the most convincing dissertations on Friedrich Nietzsche they've encountered, or books. And so I accomplished it, I got my doctorate, by writing a dissertation called Deicide and the Reemergence of Meaning. And deicide is the murder of God, of which we heard in today's reading. And my argument was that Nietzsche believed that the God constructs that existed in Lutheran Germanism in his time were pointless, meaningless, and God needed to be deconstructed, or killed, metaphorically, in order for us to find a form of affirmative religiosity that restored meaning to human existence after the death of God. Never published it, for reasons rather trivial and not worth going into this morning, but I do still have plans for it. Watch YouTube this summer. But it's the next 15 minutes here. I'm going to try to share with you the gist of that dissertation, Deicide and the Reemergence of Meaning, in a way that is not going to be so philosophically abstract you're not going to be able to follow me or understand me. Indeed, I think you're going to find this to be a very compelling sermon thesis this morning. So we're going to leap off from the death of God, and I'm going to hook my comments through maybe a half a dozen citations of Nietzsche. And rather than me lecture to you for 15 minutes through my words about Nietzsche, I'm going to use Nietzsche's writings to sort of trace a line for you from the death of God to the restoration of meaning in life, and sort of read these citations and make a few comments about them. And I think when we reach the end of this sermon, I think you'll understand why in the world Nietzsche is actually one of the most wondrous affirmative religious thinkers we've had in Western history. So you heard the reading. In the mouths of a madman, Nietzsche pronounced God dead. And he also said in the mouth of the madman that deeds, though done, take time to be seen and heard. And even though we are the ones who killed God, we still haven't even understood what we've done. And it will take centuries, said Nietzsche, for humanity to grasp the significance of the death of God. So Nietzsche wrote, "We Europeans confront a world of tremendous ruins. A few things are still towering, but much looks decayed and uncanny, while most things already lie on the ground. It's all very picturesque. Where has one ever seen more beautiful ruins, overgrown by large and small weeds? The church is this city of destruction. We see the religious community of Christianity shaken to its lowest foundations. The faith in God has collapsed. The faith in the Christian ideal is still fighting, though, its final battle. An edifice like Christianity that had been built so carefully over such a long period, it was the last construction of the Romans, after all, naturally could not be destroyed all at once. All kinds of earthquakes had to shake it. All kinds of spirits that bore and dig and gnaw and moisten have had to help. So Nietzsche lived at a time when German Lutheranism was the dominant religious expression in Germany. And it was a time when literary criticism was beginning to emerge, which turned its attention to a literary criticism of the sacred text, the Bible. He lived at a time when he understood the work of Darwin, and he understood how our biological understanding about the nature of who we are as human beings and our place in evolution was going to challenge our notions of who we are as human beings. And other psychological forces, sociological forces, etc., were all emerging in the middle of the 19th century when Nietzsche was thinking through his philosophy. And these are all the forces that came to bear on German Lutheranism / Christianity during the time of Nietzsche. And that's what he means when he says, all kinds of earthquakes had to shake it. All kinds of spirits that bore and dig and gnaw and moisten have had to help. So when Nietzsche was making his profession about the death of God, he had all of these things in mind. And he wasn't really making some kind of metaphysical statement like, there is a God, and God has literally died, and now the universe is devoid of God. Although there are places in his writing where you can read him that way, and most people do, but that's actually the least accurate way to talk about Nietzsche's proclamation of the death of God. What Nietzsche was saying is that as he looked about at the God of German Lutheranism in Germany at the time, and the nature of the church, and the fact that people's lives were barely touched by their religiosity, he said, God is dead for all psychological and sociological intents. God has become meaningless. God is effectively dead. But he wasn't an anti-Christian. It was Nietzsche who said, there has only ever been one Christian, and he died on the cross. And it was Nietzsche who said, true Christianity is possible in any age. Now, you don't get statements like that from somebody who's not a very fervent religious seeker. He was seeking a restoration of some form of meaningful Christianity or some new religion, possibly, that could be meaningful to human beings again. But we haven't grasped the significance of the death of God. And in fact, I often throw out this challenge to our atheist friends. This is actually intended to be a sermon that I think our atheist friends will reverberate with, but if you're one of our atheist friends, There is a challenge posed by Nietzsche, who says, we don't understand the significance of the death of God. Because a lot of atheists will proclaim there is no God. Nietzsche was right, God is dead. Or science has not found evidence for God, so there is no God. But what Nietzsche challenges us to do is to replace God. If there is no God, if the atheists are right, then what? Then what? This is the important question he's posing. He writes, after the Buddha was dead, his shadow was still shown for centuries in a cave. A tremendous, gruesome shadow. God is dead, but given the way of humanity, there may still be caves for thousands of years in which his shadow will be shown. And we still have to vanquish his shadow too. In other words, we may profess the death of God, even the atheists, but we are still living under the same notions of the self and the same moral formulas that Christianity has delivered to us for nearly 2,000 years. So God may be dead, but we haven't shifted our paradigm. We haven't adjusted. And this was what I think was the major project he set out to do. So, just a couple of examples of what we lost when God died that Nietzsche says we haven't even comprehended we've lost. This is from actually a different philosopher, Mark Taylor. It's a postmodern philosopher. Don't order his books and read them. They're virtually impossible, even for a philosopher. But I've tried, and I have found some nuggets in Mark's writing, and one of them is this. Of what murder are you accused? Rabbi Akor asked Zaliah. Zaliah responded, the murder of God. I will, however, add in my defense that I die along with him. Well, what in the world did that mean? Humans have believed, by and large, for thousands of years, that who we are as human beings originate from God, him or herself. That we have within us the spark of the divine, that spiritual essence of the divine that animates our own life force and gives us life. And when the biological creature drops, that life force persists and moves on. But if there is no God, that claim falls. There is no spiritual life force animating us. All that's left is our animality. And Nietzsche says we haven't comprehended the significance of this transition of the notion of the self. For instance, he says, if we really want to understand it, we need to grapple with Darwin. Darwin said, or Nietzsche said about this, if, on the other hand, the doctrines of sovereign becoming, of the fluidity of all concepts, types, and species, and the lack of any cardinal distinction between man and animal, that's what's lost with the death of God, the lack of any cardinal distinction between humans and the rest of the animal world. Doctrines which I consider true but deadly are thrust upon the people for another generation with the rage for instruction that has by now become normal. No one should be surprised if the people perishes of petty egoism, ossification, and greed, falls apart and ceases to be a people. In its place, systems of individual egoism, brotherhoods for the rapacious exploitation of the non-brothers, and similar creations of utilitarian vulgarity may perhaps appear in the arena of the future. Well, that sounds pretty nihilistic to me. It's not a hopeful citation. But Nietzsche wasn't advocating for nihilism. He was saying to us, if you're going to give up on God, you've got to consider Darwin. And if you're going to do that, you've got to shift your notion of the self, including, where does your morality now come from? You can't claim the Ten Commandments anymore. You can't complain any transcendent source for your morality. And you got to go back and remember, we're talking the middle of the 19th century here. And if you can't claim any transcendent source for the basis of human morality, where is it going to come from? What shared moral system do we have in order to live with one another? That's what he's asking. And in all honesty, even since then, we're now in the 21st century, 25 years into it. This project has not been taken on or completed by hardly anybody. Although I will say the evolutionary biologists are probably the only group who are taking on this project with fair success. But people don't know where evolutionary biologists tell us we get our morality because they're stuck in the ivory tower. And as my evolutionary biology mentor says, we don't have the time or the motivation to explain this to the general population. So in the minds of the general population, where do we get our sense of self and where does our morality come from? How do we hold one another accountable if there's no transcendent source of morality to which we must all abide? These are profound questions, and when people read Nietzsche in this regard, they read him as being very nihilistic. And so he was accused of nihilism. In fact, he was aware, even in his time, that he was being misappropriated. And he said, I wish that somebody would save me from all of this misunderstanding in my name. Hence the blog post I started just before COVID. I think I got 2 posts up before I got knocked offline, and I haven't been able to return to it, but I plan to this summer, called Saving Nietzsche. I'm going to attempt to correct the record. But he was accused at his time of being anti-Christian, an immoralist, even the Antichrist. And he writes, what were you really doing, erecting an ideal or knocking one down? I may perhaps be asked, he says. Then he goes on, but have you ever asked yourself sufficiently how much the erection of every ideal on earth has cost? If a temple is to be erected, which was the project he was engaged in, a temple must first be destroyed, which accounts for his deconstruction of Christianity. That is the law. Let anyone who can show me a case in which it is not fulfilled. So all of Nietzsche's religious and philosophical attacks on Christianity and the philosophical tradition of the West was him knocking down the temple, because he had a vision of a new temple that needed to be erected. And it was an incredibly affirmative religious/philosophical vision, which is why I wrote my dissertation. So he died in his mid-50s or so. You'll hear people, if you ever hear people talk about Nietzsche, well, he died insane, and wouldn't you too if this is how you thought about the world? But crazy notions don't crazy make. They're just crazy notions. Sometimes they can come from people who are psychologically maladjusted. But not every challenging notion that sounds crazy to us is necessarily maladjusted, and it doesn't necessarily reflect a maladjusted psyche. Nietzsche actually died of complications of syphilis. That's what happened to him. So he didn't get to finish erecting the temple he was beginning to build. In fact, he didn't get very far at all. And I had to spend thousands of hours reading everything he wrote to pull out the pieces of where I thought he was going in order to write my dissertation. And I think he was going to a beautiful place. And the place is, where do we find meaning in life if God is dead? And he gives an answer, although unfortunately unformed before he died. The Death of God reading that I did earlier today is one of the most popular, if not the most popular, citations you hear about Nietzsche if you ever encounter anybody talking about Nietzsche. But I think this one here may be his best, and it's virtually unknown. But in my mind, it articulates for us his affirmative religious vision. What if a demon were to steal after you into your loneliest loneliness and say to you, and you've got to put yourself in here. This is a thought experiment he's inviting us into. So this is you he's talking about. What if a demon were to steal after you into your loneliest loneliness and say to you, this life as you now live it and have lived it, you will have to live once more, and innumerable times more. And there will be nothing new in it. But every pain and every joy and every thought and sigh and everything unutterably small or great in your life will have to return to you, all in the same succession and sequence, throughout eternity. Would you not throw yourself down and gnash your teeth and curse the demon who spoke thus? Or would you have answered him, you are a god, and never have I heard anything more divine? If this thought gained possession of you, it would change you as you are, or perhaps crush you. The question in each and everything, do you desire this once more and innumerable times more, would lie upon your actions as the greatest weight. So what Nietzsche's doing there is challenging us to find a way to affirm our lives if the meaning of life doesn't come from some God, some principle or source beyond our own being. And he's saying to you, this moment is going to recur for you throughout eternity. This life is going to recur for you throughout eternity. What does the prospect of that do for you? Does it crush you? Or does it exhilarate you? Now, he's not saying that, in fact, you're going to repeat this life throughout eternity, though he played with the idea. What he's saying is that you find meaning in life by asking yourself in each and every moment, is this moment unfolding the way I would like it to unfold if I had to live it over and over and over and over again? And he's challenging us to find a way to affirm each moment. And I think there are two quick answers to this, but we're running out of time here. One answer to this is, if you can't say yes to this moment, that you would like it to recur for yourself eternally throughout time, you better find another moment. Don't you want to live in moments that you can always say yes to? Choice is yours to make. Or, if you don't want to find another moment, maybe you need to drill down deeper into the moment you're in until you do find the beauty and wonder and joy of it, so that you can affirm it. And I think what Nietzsche is really doing there is trying to say to us, drill down into your moments until you find the beauty and the joy and wonder in them, so that you can give a heartfelt yes to the life you're living. And that's where your meaning comes from. How much more of a profound humanistic vision of religiosity can you get? He says, my formula for greatness in a human being is amor fati. That one wants nothing to be different. Not forward, not backward, not in all eternity. Not merely bear what is necessary, still less conceal it. And idealism is mendaciousness in the face of what is necessary. But love it. Can you say, amor fati, I love this, in the moment you're living? That's Nietzsche's challenge. That's his solution to the death of God. And that is a profoundly affirmative religious philosophical position to take. And I think if you were to carry this thought through your days and ask yourself, can I affirm this moment with that kind of passion? It would change you as you are. And if it changes you as you are, you might relate to this, which is where we'll end and then do our final hymn. In Thus Spake Zarathustra, Nietzsche wrote, now I am light. Now I fly. Now I see myself beneath myself. Now a God dances through me. That's affirmation, folks. Our last hymn is number 311, Let It Be a Dance. Please turn to it and rise as you are able.
just remember that Alex will be upstairs in the classroom for the introduction to Unitarian Universalism, and we're going to close the service with some words of Martin Luther King. King shared Nietzsche's contempt for the organized church because he felt that they actually did participate in the killing of God too. And he once said that we suffer from a plethora of creeds and an anemia of deeds. And then lastly, he always is there to remind us that we must never allow ourselves to be well adjusted to injustice, because that's what the organized church did. They became well adjusted to injustice. And that's where the death of God in the 20th century took place. Amen.